This is Locally Sourced Spirituality, a podcast about finding the divine right under your feet. You don't have to go anywhere. God is with us. God is everywhere. And if you don't like the word God, the divine, the presence, the underlying truth of everything, whatever words work for you, that's what we're looking for. This is episode 14, and I call this one Lovingly Imperfect. So being locally sourced spirituality, I'm committed to talking about things that happen right here where I live in Lansing, Michigan. I started this podcast when I lived in Ludington, Michigan, and then I moved here, and so I'm always looking for those glimpses of the divine right where I am, so that when I share them, you can look for the glimpses of divine where you are, and if there's some kind of common theme, some sort of thread that we could tug on to see, maybe we can find some meaning and find some beauty in this world through our common experience. Well, this past Saturday, I went to a football game, a Big Ten football game, a Michigan State University football game, in fact. And I had a great time, I have to tell you. I had just a really fun time. And, of course, East Lansing, which is right next to Lansing, is the home of Michigan State University and the Spartans. And one thing that I've learned living here in Lansing is that Michigan State University isn't just a college in the next town. It is a presence that is interwoven into the very fabric of this community. It's a part of living here. Whether you went to that school or not, whether you like the school or not, it is part of life here, and there's really no getting around that fact. So I went to that football game, like I said, and had a good time. And there's lots of elements that I noticed about the experience that kind of connected with spiritual themes. But there's only one thing that I saw, one thing that I noticed that actually kind of gave me a glimpse of the presence of the divine. I'll get to that a little bit later. But the things that I noticed right off the bat was at the beginning of the game, just before the beginning of the game, the students were filling the stands. There were 72,000 people in Spartan Stadium. They sang the fight song, and then they sang their alma mater song, which is kind of a strange change of pace, because it's really kind of a slow, kind of low-key song. But what it talks about the buildings, and it talks about memories, and it talks about faith, and it talks about the shadows, and it talks about a time when we won't be here anymore, but we'll remember, and it talks about faith. And really, it isn't explicit, but it has an implicit reference to eternal life, and that when we're not here, that our memories will still be here, the shadows will still be the same. And so it's creating this timeline for people, for the alumni, that they remember when they're on campus, and it creates a timeline for the current students, so that when they go away, that things will always be the same. The spirit of the school will always remain. And I thought that was sort of kind of quasi-religion. But okay, I sat and I experienced that. But then they were about ready to announce the teams. Michigan State team was not on the field yet, but then the big Jumbotron came on, and we could see that the team was somewhere in some locker room or down some hall someplace. And you could see on the Jumbotron that they're making their way down the hall. And we know that they're going to come out of the tunnel on the north end of the field. So you watch the end of the tunnel, and you see the Jumbotron above, and you know they're coming, and you know they're going to emerge. And so you're waiting for this thing to happen. And the band is playing, and the cheerleaders are jumping up and down and going nuts, and the crowd is waiting in anticipation. And then the team appears at the edge of the tunnel onto the field, but they don't come out. And then the music shifts to some AC/DC song, and the smoke machines go, and then they come pouring out of the tunnel onto the stadium, and the crowd just went nuts. I mean, they were so pumped. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, these kids were just in class the day before, sitting next to other students at Michigan State University. These are just kids. These are 18, 19, 20-year-old kids. And they're being treated like this. It's almost like they're the embodiment of this spirit of the community that they were singing about in their alma mater song just a few minutes ago. It's like they're the avatars of Michigan State University spirit. And so they come to the field with this great amount of adulation, and I just wonder what that does to somebody to be cheered for like that, for not even having done anything yet. They haven't even started playing the game. Now, I went to this game with my brother-in-law. He invited me to come along, and I'm glad that I did, because like I said, I had a great time. And he explained to me that there's a young man on the team, and his name is Hunter Risen, and he told me that he's the son of Pro Bowler Andre Rison, who used to actually go to Michigan State University also. And so there's this interesting story that the previous week when Hunter caught his first pass, that there was celebration in the stadium. But the interesting thing is that where my brother-in-law's seat is, that to his left, most of the alumni sit, and to his right is where the students sit. And when Hunter Risen caught this pass, the alumni section cheered wildly, while the students barely even noticed. You see, the alumni probably saw young Hunter Risen as part of the community in a deeper way than even the other student athletes were, because he is a son of someone that they cheered for years ago. In fact, they probably see him as the community's son. See, we have this identity. We start with ourselves, right? We are who we are, and then if you imagine that as a dot, and then there's concentric circles going out from that. Our next circle would be our immediate family, the people that live with us in our household. Those are the people that we draw identity from. Those are the people that how we understand who we are. And then there's another, if you take another circle out from that, it's our wider community, the place where we live, schools, work, our town. And then if you go further out from that, you start getting to just strictly geography, right? It's your state boundaries or your national boundaries, but these are all ways in which we identify who we are as individuals. And so within that, we all have a social location, right? Within those concentric circles, when we go back down to the individual, we all have these elements of ways that we find place in our culture, whether good or bad or neutral or otherwise. Like our gender, our race, our economic class, our age, how physically able we are, our religion, our sexual orientation, and our physical location, our geography. These are all ways that we find ourselves positioned in our culture. Now, some of these identities can be an advantage. Some we find ourselves at a disadvantage. And some of these things are an advantage or a disadvantage depending on where we are, right? So if I'm here in the Midwest as a Christian, well, that's generally an advantage. Now, if I were to go someplace in the world that was hostile to Christianity, well, of course, that would be a disadvantage. Well, I was born here, and I was raised in the Christian faith, and so my social location when it comes to religion is one that is positive. Now, if you look at other things like race. I'm a white dude, and I didn't choose that. It's just how I was born. And you have to agree that it's easier for people who are white to find advantage in our culture today than it is for people of other races. And so I own that. I don't think that it's right. It's not a good thing. It's just the way it is right now. And so you can go through all these elements of social location, and you can see how there are people who are advantaged and who are disadvantaged socially. Age, it depends on what you're doing, but generally, younger people have an advantage in society, but not always. I'm a pastor, and don't you know that older pastors have much more credibility than younger pastors? So in this, my little minute corner of the world, in a very specific set of circumstances, being a mid-40s person is a disadvantage compared to someone that's a little more seasoned. Just I get less credibility. So depends on what's happening, depends on where you are, but generally you find yourself or in society with a particular set of factors in social location. And of course the variables, all these variables can produce and do produce a wide variety of people. And so you could probably do the math. I'm not going to do that, but just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different variables. And if they're binary, if there's just 2 choices on each, well, then you can, pretty quickly do the math on how many different variables. But of course, there's more than just 2 variables per each one, and it all depend on each other. When we see the possibilities in social location, we see that diversity is the norm. Diversity is sort of nature's default. I mean, there's just going to be a wide variety of people, right? So I was talking to my son about this. He's just starting 8th grade in a new school. And where we come from, it was pretty ethnically homogenous. It was a pretty white neighborhood that we came from in Ludington to come down here to Lansing, where there's a lot more diversity, and it's so exciting to be here. And he went to school the first day, and came home, and he's like, "It's so great, Dad. There's black people and brown people and white people, and there's Asians, and he said, this is what he said, there's those people with they wrap the thing on their head," and I think he's talking about Sikhs. I'm not sure, but that's what I'm guessing, but I don't know. But he said, with all these different kinds of people, racism just doesn't make sense. I'm like, yes, you're absolutely right. It does not make sense, but it's real. So we have our identities. We have who we are. We know where we are in society, and we know that some things are an advantage and some things are a disadvantage, but yet we still want to be loved and accepted for just the very unique person that we are. We want to be able to live our life as authentic people. We want to be able to function in our world without having to compromise who we are. And so we don't want to give up our identity. We don't want to lose who we are as individuals. And we have these things in our culture. We have, I guess, rituals that sort of take a particular aspect of our identity and celebrate it. Like in my tradition, in the Christian tradition, we have baptism. And in baptism, we say that we become a part of the family of God, that we are baptized and that we take on Christ's identity. We take on who Christ is in us. But then, of course, we don't lose who we are. We let that Christ consciousness live in us and through us, through the gifts, through our individuality, through the way that God has already made us. And so we celebrate the sacrament, we call it a baptism. And so I was at this football game, right, on Saturday, and there is clearly a Spartan identity. There is clearly an identity that is associated with being part of this community of Michigan State University students and fans and supporters. And the thing is that the piece that I saw that looks like there's a glimmer of the divine in it is that it cuts through many of the factors of social location. It didn't matter what gender you identified as. I saw people of all races. I saw people of various ages. I didn't see much diversity in the way of physical ability, but I wasn't really looking for it. No one asked me my religion. No one really cared about my religion. No one was curious or said anything about sexual orientation. And I guess the two areas that I've mentioned before that really don't, this experience didn't cut across as far as social location is actually geography. It's difficult for people to come from far away to experience this, although they can, but it's a barrier. And the other thing is class, economic class. Now, it's $50 to go to this game, and that's not cheap. And I imagine a lot of folks that struggle with finances probably wouldn't be able to spend $50 to go watch a football game on a Saturday afternoon. This is one of those things where it's not perfect. It's not the thing that I'm advocating for. I'm not saying that we should all just go to Spartan football. Of course, I don't really care that deeply about it. But the fact is that it cuts across so many of those factors of social location that draws everyone into a community. I'm not a Spartan. Never went to Michigan State University. I went to a different college. Many of my family have graduated from Michigan State, and I have one child actually that is a current student at Michigan State University. But there's something interesting that happened. I mentioned something like that I wasn't really a Spartan. And as we were tailgating before the game, enjoying tacos and drinks, someone mentioned, like, well, today you are. It's like, you're here, you're participating, so that makes you part of this community. That makes you part of what's happening here. And that tailgate was such a cool thing, because these are folks that have been tailgating together for the last 2 or 3 decades, right? And I have a little bit of history with them. Many moons ago, we took a road trip together to Louisiana to watch a Michigan State football game down in Louisiana. And the experience was interesting. It was fun. Sometimes it got a little dangerous. It was monotonous at times. It was a whole experience. And so I had this shared experience with some of the people that were there. And so we can remember those things, and we can reestablish these long-term and lasting relationships, even though it's been actually several years since I've seen some of them. So we had this community. There's this community that gathers together, and it's about, and that's what it's about. It's about how we're common, how we find similarity in the same space. Now, I don't have much in common with any of them when it comes to those social location factors, but in that space, in that time, that tailgating and football game time, we decided that the one thing that we were all that day were Spartan fans. And so I see this whole experience as a ritual to affirm identity, to affirm a particular identity. Now, the freshmen in the stands in Spartan Stadium, they were being handed a new identity. It's like they got these free T-shirts to wear and said, "Wear this, and you'll all look the same. And these are the cheers that you chant, and these are your players. And learn this, and learn this alma mater song, because we want to hand you this identity, because we want you to carry it on, because we want you to hand on this identity to your kids. So try this on to see if this is you." So my hope is that we see things like this. Like I said, I'm not advocating for tailgating and football games as a spiritual practice, but I am advocating for opening your heart and your spirit to seeing that what is needed is this continued effort to overcome our imperfections, our desire to live within our divisions, to live within our particular social location and divide each other up and to stay separate from each other, to create events and circumstances and experiences where people can be exactly who they are in their wonderful uniqueness without having to defend it, without having to worry about it, and without even having to think about it, just knowing that they're accepted exactly how they are in that moment. Now, I'm a pastor of a church, and that's my hope for the church, that someday we get to the point where we can accept everyone as they are, just as they are in this moment. That's all I have for today. Talk to you next time.